Thank you also, Undersecretary General DiCarlo and Director Doughton, for your very sobering briefing. We continue to support the United Nations' vital, albeit difficult to implement, humanitarian efforts in Gaza. The United States is deeply concerned about reports of civilian casualties following the August 10th strike by the IDF on the compound in Gaza that included a school and a mosque, sheltering desperate, displaced people, including women and children. We have raised our concerns with Israel, and while they indicated they were targeting senior officials from Hamas and Palestinian Jihad, they have an obligation to do everything possible under international humanitarian law to protect civilians. We mourn every civilian lost in this horrific incident and in this conflict. But this much we do know and must be acknowledged. Hamas continues to gather and continues to operate out of schools with no regard for the well-being of civilians. Israel has a right to pursue Hamas. Israel has a right to respond to threats, but how it does that matters. We've said repeatedly and consistently that Israel must take measures to minimize civilian harm. Colleagues, I cannot stress enough President Biden's view that it is time to bring immediate relief to the long-suffering people in Gaza and the long-suffering hostages and their families. The best way to do that is a ceasefire in Gaza with a hostage deal. The United States, alongside Qatar and Egypt, has worked tirelessly for months to forge the framework agreement on the table, with only the details of implementations to be concluded. A framework based on the principles endorsed by this Council in Resolution 2735. Simply put, the deal needs to get done now. Now. As President Biden emphasized in a statement last week with leaders of Qatar and Egypt, and I quote, "There is no further time to waste nor excuses from any party for further delay. It is time to release the hostages, begin the ceasefire, and implement this agreement," unquote. We've called on both sides to resume urgent discussion on Thursday, August 15th in Doha or Cairo to close all remaining gaps and commence implementation of the deal without further delay. As mediators, we are prepared to present a final bridging proposal, one that resolves the remaining implementation issues in a manner that meets the expectations of all parties. We welcome the statements of support for this effort, such as the one issued by Algeria over the weekend, and we call on every member of this council to speak with one voice, to press Hamas to participate in the discussions on August 15th, and for both sides to agree to implement the deal on the table without further conditions or delays. A durable ceasefire could accelerate efforts to restore basic services, including electricity and water and sanitation, bringing much-needed relief to Palestinian civilians, many of whom have been displaced multiple times. It could enable an urgently needed vaccination campaign to stop the spread of polio, and it would facilitate the release of all hostages held by Hamas, including 8 Americans and citizens from many other countries. We also have been clear that a ceasefire in Gaza could help enable diplomatic efforts to restore calm along the Blue Line and reduce regional tensions. Indeed, from the start of this conflict between Hamas and Israel, the United States has worked to avoid a situation in which the fighting in Gaza spirals into a broader regional conflict. 4 months ago exactly, on April 13th, the United States worked closely with Israel and our partners in the region to repel Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel and stave off a broader conflict. Now we're once again in a moment of heightened threat. Consequently, The United States has taken needed precautionary steps, including moving an aircraft carrier group and additional air assets to the region so that should the situation arise again, we are prepared to defend Israel and U.S. military personnel in the region against any threats. But let me be clear, our deployment of additional military assets are not a prediction of what is to come. A broader regional conflict is not inevitable. The United States' overall goal remains to turn the temperature down in the region, deter and defend against any future attacks, and avoid regional conflict. That starts with finalizing a deal for an immediate ceasefire with hostage release in Gaza. We need to get this over the finish line. Again, we urge every member of this council to say clearly and unequivocally that it is time to finalize and implement this agreement. Thank you, Mr. President.